You can also set the jig up to cut both cheeks of a centered tenon without having to rotate and reclamp the stock, and I'll show you how to do that next. So what we'll do to achieve that is we're going to use a combination of 4 carriage stops. So we'll calibrate where we want one side of the tenon to be, set a carriage stop to that point, and then we use a scrap of wood to reference another carriage stop. And I've got this scrap of wood marked so that it's always facing the same direction. I've got this side marked so that's always out, and the top marked so it's always up. So we'll make that pass and then remove the rest of the material by moving the stock carriage that direction. And then when we're done cutting that side of the tenon, we'll move this stop over, calibrate where we want the other side of the tenon to be cut, move this stock or move this carriage stop into the jig, and use that same reference block oriented the exact same way, and then move this carriage stop up to the side there. And now we can make that pass to create that side of the tenon, and then move the stock carriage that direction to remove the rest of the material. And we can clamp in our next tenon, cut that side of it, then we'll move this carriage stop back over there, move this stock carriage over this way, reset this carriage stop, and then we're ready to cut the other side of the tenon there, and then remove the rest of the material by moving the stock carriage that direction again. So for this demo, I'll be using stock that is 710 thousandths thick, and I'm going to shoot for a centered 1/4 inch mortise. So that means I'll set the jig up to remove exactly 230 thousandths on either face of the stock. So I have the stock scored for the length of the tenon I want, and I'll go ahead and set the blade to that height and clamp it in the jig. Now I'll go ahead and clamp the stock in. And then I'm going to start the blade up and calibrate my 0 point for this face as soon as I can hear the blade engage the wood. Alright, so I'll zero the caliper out at that point. Now I'll move the stock that direction by 230 thousandths. Now I want to set a positive stop so that I can make this cut and not go any further this direction, so that I don't cut into the material I want to leave for the tenon. And then I want to be able to move the stock carriage that direction to remove this remaining material. So to do that, I'll go ahead and scoot this carriage stop over to the jig and tighten that down, and then use my gauge block to create a secondary reference point with this carriage stop. Now I can make that first pass and move the stock carriage that direction to remove that material. So we'll go ahead and do that now. Now I'll loosen this carriage stop and move it over to this reference point. That way I can reposition the stock carriage to cut the other side of the tenon. And now what I want to do is find where this face of the stock is engaging this side of the blade, and then move it in this direction 230 thousandths to cut the other side of the tenon. Okay, so right there's the 0 point. Now I'll zero the caliper out and move the stock carriage this direction by 230 thou. Now that the caliper's zeroed out, I'll move it over to 100, 200, 210, 220, 230 thou right there. So now what I'll do is slide this carriage stop over against the jig. That'll be the reference point for this side of the tenon. Then I'll use the gauge block again and use this carriage stop to create that secondary reference for when I need to move the stops again, cut the opposing side of the tenon. Now in this position, I can go ahead and cut this cheek of the tenon and then move the stock carriage this direction to remove the remaining material. So now we should have a centered tenon that was created without flipping and reclamping the stock. And let's see how close we got to 1/4 of an inch. So we ended up with a tenon thickness of about 240, maybe 241 thou. So we're within about 10 thou. We ended up a little bit skinny, probably still close enough for most applications. What we can do if we want to get that tenon a little bit closer to 1/4 inch thickness is we can move the jig back over to where it's referencing this stop, zero the caliper out, and then move this stop over by a few thousandths of an inch. So zero the caliper out there. And we were about 10 thousandths shy, so I think I'll move the stop over by about 4 thousandths on either side. So with the caliper zeroed out, I'll loosen that and then move it over by about 4 to 5 thousandths. Reset that stop, and then reset this one with the gauge block. And we'll do the same thing here on the other side. Okay, so I'll remove this reference block, move this carriage stop back to this reference stop so that we can move the jig over to recalibrate this position. Using our gauge block, we know that this is exactly where this carriage stop was before. Make sure I have that exactly where I want it. Yep. Move the stock carriage over to that position. Zero the caliper out. Just double check this position here. Okay. Move the stock carriage over to that. Zero the caliper out. Loosen this. Then we'll move it that way by about 4 to 5 thou. Right about there. Reposition that. Then we'll use our gauge block to reset this reference stop. All right, now we'll cut another test tenon. All right, so clamp in the other end of this piece and give this one a run. Reposition this stop over here. Gauge block. All ready for this side. All right, now we'll see if we got any closer to exactly a 1/4 inch tenon. So now we're about at 248 thousandths. So we would call that close enough, or within just a few thousandths.